On to the north. We're going up here. We're not doing this by chronology. We're doing it by region. And now I'm taking you to New England, the New England colonies. There is no state in America today called New England. It is a region. I'll bet you somebody in this room also thinks there is a state called Chesapeake. There ain't no state called Chesapeake. These are general references to regions. In Chesapeake Bay, New England is a region. What's the football team from this area? What do they call themselves? What's their full name? The New England Patriots. That's because New England has Boston, but it's on the whole, it doesn't have the wealth. Hey, New Hampshire doesn't have the wealth to support a team, does it? Maine doesn't. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union. Connecticut, it's a region. New Englanders know this from New England. If you call, and many of my folks in my classes are totally unaware of this because you haven't been there, very unfamiliar with American geography. New York is not part of New England. Don't call a New Yorker a New Englander. Don't call a New Englander a New Yorker. They'll smack you in the face. Now, this establishment of New England, the first settlement's going to be Plymouth Plantation. It's going to involve a group of people we call the Pilgrims. And this involves the Mayflower and landing on Plymouth Rock and the first Thanksgiving and all these legendary events. And this is supposed to be a representation of the Pilgrims landing on Puritan Rock. So, in the minds of the vast majority of people living in the United States, when they, since Thanksgiving became a national holiday in 1942, celebrated by most people in this country, regardless of where they come from. Most people think this is where America began. That's if Jay Leno was asking questions of people walking down Hollywood Boulevard, said, where did America begin? They always say this. Well, it must have been the Pilgrims. No, it wasn't. Now, what was the motivation for establishing the first English settlement up there? Well, in this case, it's not money. This does involve a group of people who want to get away from persecution so that they can worship God the way they want to. This does involve some vague sense the quest for religious freedom. Yes. So who founded that first colony? Well, we've come to call them Pilgrims. They are part of a movement called the Puritan movement. And I need to tell you what those are all about now. So here I go. Now check it out, everybody. The founding of New England has to do with this extreme religious sect whose religious beliefs are so powerful they wanted to get away from the rest of the world and establish a place where they could do what they wanted to do in supreme isolation. They knew they had the gateway to God, and nobody else did. So how do we get to there? Well, Christianity. Jesus Christ, his followers create the framework for Christianity. And they do it in Europe, on the bones of the Roman Empire. And it spreads throughout this area, out into Eastern Europe. Islam takes over after a certain point and dominated from the 700s on. So if I were to, up until 1500 of the Common Era, after the birth of Christ, there was one Catholic Church in Western Europe, and that was the Roman Catholic Church, named so because it was founded in the framework of the Roman Empire. Now, I don't want to muddy the waters and confuse people by talking about the different kind of Christianity that took root over in places like Serbia and Greece and Armenia, where the Eastern Orthodox Church is the tradition, not part of the Roman Catholic tradition, but they all saw Jesus Christ as the Son of God. But bottom line, the area we're talking about is Western Europe. Everybody there was a Christian by definition and a member of the Roman Catholic Church, except for the smattering of Jews and Muslims scattered throughout the area. And then something happens. And so the Roman Catholic Church had a monopoly. It was an incredibly powerful and wealthy institution with, by this time, 1,200 years of history behind it. Boom, this happens. The Protestant Reformation explodes, slowly gathering momentum after 1517. What's that? This is like a revolution, a breakaway movement away from Catholicism. Who starts it? Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a Catholic priest and monk from Saxony, which is one of the German-speaking provinces. So he was a member of this church, deeply embedded in its education system. But he had all kinds of grievances against them. And on a given day in 1517, he posted his 95 criticisms of the Catholic Church, his Luther's 95 theses, on the door of Wittenberg Castle, which was like a message board, saying, "I protest. Here are my protests against the corruption of the Catholic Church." And we don't need to know all 95. But the key things that he was opposed to was the fact that in his mind, the Catholic Church had become a corrupt institution, a self-serving institution, where they were selling salvation. You pay me money, I'll put it here, and here's a ticket that says you go to heaven. That's what an indulgent was. You pay money to the church, and you are paying a ticket to heaven. We are guaranteeing you salvation. Luther says, you can't do that. Only God can make these decisions. He also says the Pope is not infallible. The Pope is a man. Only God is infallible. He also wanted to get married. Celibacy means that priests have to remain unmarried. He had many grievances. He didn't know this, but his attempt to criticize and modernize and reform the Catholic Church just caught fire. And the Catholic Church had become this powerful institution that a bunch of local rulers despised. They owned massive amounts of territory in their own boundaries. They saw this as an opportunity to break away, kick the Catholic Church out, seize their lands, get that wealth, establish their independence. Boom, you got a revolution. It's not a revolution, it's like 100 years of war throughout Western Europe. As inside many countries like Britain, like England, like France, like the German-speaking provinces, there's a fight between the people trying to break away and be Protestants, Protestants protesting against the Catholic Church, versus the Catholics who are defending the Mother Catholic Church. And it's all settled out over 100 years. Some places became primarily Catholic. France is primarily Catholic. England became primarily Protestant. Germany is a mix. Poland is heavily Catholic. And on and on and on. Spain is Catholic, bless my soul.
Catholic or atheist now? I'm not sure.
There are some priests who are right on the edge of atheism. It's complicated. Now, we still haven't got where we need to go. This is all about English settlers. What does this have to do with the English people going to the British North America? Okay, in England, the King of England got embroiled in the Protestant Reformation. It was an opportunity for him to break away from the power of the Catholic Church and seize the Catholic Church land. He also wanted to divorce. He was a Catholic. England was a realm within the zone of Roman Catholicism. He wanted to divorce Catherine of Navarre, his first wife, but she could not bear him a living son. So ultimately he'll have many wives and kill one after another until he finally dies himself. He wanted to get that divorce from Catherine of Navarre, who was descended from Isabel and Ferdinand. They wouldn't give him a divorce. They wouldn't annul the marriage. He sees this as an opportunity to break away. And he says, today I am establishing England as a new church. I'm establishing the Anglican Church, the Church of England, and I am its head. And I no longer report to the Pope. I'm seizing all Pope lands, all the monasteries, all the nunneries. You all belong to me. And this is how you get the Archbishop of Canterbury as the head of a whole different structure of religion. This starts some wars. This starts civil war. It takes decades for it to sort out, but Henry starts it. Bottom line, English becomes a Protestant nation. Now, who are the Puritans? They're English people. It's a movement within England. That the Protestants, Luther's Protestant movement was to try to purify the Catholic Church, render it less corrupt, make it more pure and true to God's principles and the principles of Jesus as far as he was concerned. The Puritans are also part of this movement. They felt that the Anglican Church was too Catholic. And in fact, the Anglican Church had basically copied a bunch of the religious practices and ceremonies of the Catholic Church. Had a hierarchy of priests and bishops and the archbishop. Archbishop is over all the bishops. So by the late 1500s, let's see how long this takes. This is 50 years later. In England, you got a bunch of people who are middle-class people saying the English church is corrupt. It's lax. It guarantees everybody a gateway to heaven. That's not right. It celebrates a bunch of different, the priests are all fancy with a bunch of fancy regalia. We want a simple church according to Jesus's ideas. We want a local church. We want our own, we hate this hierarchy. We hate all the ceremony. We want simplicity. And we want a strict church where you understand you don't get to heaven. God decides. So those are the Puritans. A movement throughout England featuring people with money who are highly religious, more religious than most English people, who wanted a stricter, purer church. Now, who were the Pilgrims? They were an even more extreme group of people. They were part of the Puritan movement, but it's like it's militant edge saying, we have the one strict way to heaven, and everybody else is corrupt and full of sin. And this little tiny group of people from Scrooby, England, just a handful of households, really. They are like a fanatical sect of Puritans. They went away. They left England to go live in Holland, pursuing purity. They didn't like it. They come back. They finally get permission to go to found their own colony. Now, generally speaking, what do the Puritans believe? All of this stuff. All of this stuff. They believe the English church, the Anglican church, is too Catholic. They want it to be simplified. They want simple ceremony. They believe in predestination. It's a very dark belief. God has a secret list of those people who will go to heaven. No man can know what it is. No good acts will determine whether you get to heaven. It is simple. God knows. Calvinism is absolutely part of this. John Calvin was a practitioner of Puritanism. Thank you for mentioning that. John Calvin is one of their founding, ideological fathers. He laid it all out. So only through a predetermined, predestined list has been laid out by God of those who are born who will ultimately go to heaven. You'll never know who it is, but all you can do is live a good life and hope for the best. Religion in your religious beliefs is supposed to be the center of life. This involves a great deal of self-denial. That's why when Thanksgiving rolls around and the teachers pull out all of these little pictures and put them on the windows in elementary school, they always have little characters like this of a happy pilgrim couple. And this is all kind of silly and childish, but it is accurate in the sense that these people are wearing dark, somber colors because that's what Puritanism demanded. You will not wear jewelry. You will not wear finery. You will not make yourself the center of attention. You'll make God the center of attention. And another aspect of their philosophy is that in the kingdom of God, every person has a calling. It is your vocation, whether it be a shoemaker or a wife. Do it well. By doing it well, you glorify God. And so Puritans worked hard at their chosen vocation, whether it's a merchant or a farmer, and people who work hard usually do well, and they had done well. And these are not poor people. This is a movement of generally well-to-do people. And when, in the fullness of time, the denominations and churches they establish are connected with the Congregationalist Church and the Presbyterian Church. Presbyterianism is especially associated with John Calvin and Scotland. The Congregationalist Church are all over America. They are, in some sense, they have descended or ascended from the Puritan movement in England. So the Pilgrims, so-called, they didn't call themselves Pilgrims, so this radical sect, little tiny group of people. Most Puritans are going to stay in England and believe that England could be reformed. The Puritans decided England is hopelessly corrupt. They're going to sell everything they got, lock, stock, and barrel. They get permission to do so. They contract the Mayflower, and away they go. And you can go to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and see a replica of the Mayflower, and that's how crummy that little tiny. That's a nice looking little ship, but it is tiny. So let's go there. Let's go. Now, they will set sail late in the year in fall. They're going to be in trouble as a result of this. They obviously didn't, this was not well-planned expedition. This is the voyage of the Mayflower. People coming over on the Mayflower. So they leave England in September, and that's an invitation to travel. They were given a grant of, they were given permission to land in portion of the Virginia colony. They don't land there. They wind up way off course, much farther north, and they took that as a intervention from God. So they're out there by themselves, and the people on the vessel write a document called the Mayflower Compact. Mayflower Compact that says we will form a government among us, and we will abide by the rules of that government. It's one of the famous documents in the development of the USA. But there were no communities of this sort back then. There were only Native American communities. They have wound up in this area, which is a long way from Virginia. They scout the coast for a period of weeks, or an extended period, and finally decide we're going to lay down our settlement here. 104 people total on that boat. Only about 35 were actually members of this radical sect. So that's a funny thing. They say, this looks like a suitable area, let's go there and establish Plymouth Plantation. So Plymouth, Mass is still there. And this is the seed of New England. They landed the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock. And you can go to Plymouth, Mass and see Plymouth Rock. They do it on December 21. Hey, deep in the winter, pretty much. If not deep in the winter, a cold time of the year. They land on Plymouth Rock. And I'm going to save you all the expense and trouble of going to Plymouth by showing you some pictures of this magnificent specimen. This is one of the greatest things you're ever going to see. So I want you to hold your breath and grab your socks and pull them up, because I don't want anybody to pass out when I show you the honest-to-God Plymouth Rock. And I'm going to show it to you a little bit at a time so nobody passes out. Okay. There's a little bit. There's a little bit. There's a little bit. There's a little. There it is. That's it. That's Plymouth Rock. That's honest-to-God Plymouth Rock. 1620s chiseled into it. Now, Plymouth Rock is a piece of junk. In fact, I mean, there was no Plymouth Rock. It's stupid. How do you land on a rock? Come on, give me a break. At some point, the city fathers of Plymouth decided they wanted a tourist attraction, and this happened in the 1800s. Hey, so here's a rock. Let's say it's Plymouth Rock. Let's drag it over here. And people used to chip pieces off of it. That's why it's been busted and cemented back together again. It used to be much larger. Then they put it in a little cave here, a little jail cell, so nobody could get at it. People go by and throw their drinks on it and throw money on it. Sometimes you go to a historical artifact and it's nothing. And this is one of those cases. Not far from Plymouth, there is a living history museum called Plymouth Plantation, where you can go. They're trying to live the lives of the Puritans. Now, let me move on. That little tiny settlement managed to cling to existence, but it's not the main deal. Here are a series of misconceptions about this particular event. The Plymouth Plantation was not the first colony. Jamestown is. The Pilgrims didn't call themselves Pilgrims. Most of the people in Mayflower were not religiously motivated. They were workers. They were Plymouth Rock is a fake. Really, the Puritans didn't establish the basis in New England. A larger group is going to come in. They're going to do it. Thanksgiving, they do, after 1 year of survival, after harvest, they did hold a ceremony, a peaceful ceremony involving the natives coming over, and they shared food, probably venison and local game, probably no turkey. And that became ultimately in 1942, at a time of terrible stress and war, the official holiday for all of America. And traditionally, if you're going to have Thanksgiving, you have these symbolic foods: the bird, the great big turk, the representative of the native bird, and things like cranberries and squash and corn and so forth. All these things are symbolic of the Native American origins. Now, I got to keep moving. You don't need all that stuff. You know what Thanksgiving is. This is not a revelation. This is not a revelation. Now, those guys, that little tiny little community clinging to existence here, they persisted until in 1630 the big wave comes. By 1630, a bunch of Puritans, Congregationalists, were fed up with England, and they put together a very large expedition. They bought a charter from the Crown to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and they'll go over there in mass, 17 ships, 1,000 people, and they really lay down the framework for New England, a Puritan society, where everybody there believes similarly, that your religious beliefs are number one, worship God, not yourself. They come together as families, not a bunch of men, but family life was central to their beliefs. And they'll start to do well because it was a fully well-planned expedition. And over time, over decades and then ultimately centuries, they'll fan out. It's that particular settlement where Mr. Winthrop, their earliest governor, makes a sermon about this being a beacon, as a city upon a hill, a beacon of light to the rest of the world. And that's a phrase that's been used to describe America ever since that time. Did they believe in religious freedom? They had escaped persecution. Did they believe in religious freedom? Did they want to allow people to believe however they wanted to? Absolutely not. If you lived in Puritan land, you had to toe the line. And if you didn't, you went to jail or you needed to leave. So what they established there was like a theocracy, where the civil authorities were also tied to the religious authorities. It's kind of like the Islamic Republic of Iran today. So in order to be a member of the church, you had a full member of the church. Only full members of the church could vote. Everybody had to attend church on pain of punishment. Everybody had to pay taxes to support the Congregationalist church. And famously, two people run afoul of this. Anne Hutchinson was a highly religious woman, a highly religious Puritan who developed a little following of her own and almost like separate Bible studies. She began to preach ideas that were contrary to the church elders. She's put on trial for sedition and banished. Roger Williams actually was a Puritan minister. He began to preach some ideas from the pulpit that were rejected by the authorities, and he ran out of town for his life, basically, fearing imprisonment. And he runs over here to Rhode Island and establishes Providence. Bottom line, New England grew. And as they grew, they eventually broke up into separate charters. Out of this, these are New England colonies: Connecticut, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. That is New England, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your attention. I haven't talked about the middle colonies yet. As I've told you, I know, and there's nothing bad about it. There's nothing embarrassing. Many of my students don't know anything about geography. They've never heard the term New England. New England is not a state; it's a region. And some people, if they know where New York is, they think it might be part of New England. It is not. It's not New England. Historically, it's not New England. The New Englanders know who they are. So the middle colonies that's a term I'm using to describe New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. We'll put Delaware in there. Delaware is a funny little state. It's kind of caught in the middle. Little tiny state. Now, I won't even spend time talking about New Jersey. I just won't. So you can let it go. New Jersey has connections to the founding of Pennsylvania. I'm going to concentrate on the big ones because these states were important. These colonies were incredibly important to the development of the USA, and they're still very important states. You may not know it, but they are. Pennsylvania is a very important state. New York is a very important state. Now, what happens in the case of New York? You know, the Dutch had it to begin with. All they really occupied was the Hudson River Valley and Manhattan. The bottom line is that England, which is itself a little tiny country, waged war repeatedly with the Netherlands. During the 1700s, they're fighting for control of the world economy. And ultimately, the English will win. They'll boot them out. They had the means to do it, and they did it. And they finally, they defeat what the small resistance the Dutch are able to put up to protect their interests. And the English take over the New Netherlands and christen it New York after the Duke of York. And they take over New Amsterdam, and they declare it to be New York, the city of New York. And so it will remain for the rest of all time.
They called it New York back then?
That's what yes. Yes. They took away ain't no New Amsterdam no more. This is now New York. And in the traces of the Dutch are still there. There's an area called Bedford-Stuyvesant. That's from one of the Dutch governors. You've heard of Haarlem. Those are Dutch terms. The Knickerbockers. That's a Dutch term. But otherwise, the Bronx is from a Dutch family. But otherwise, they're gone. And I have to say this about New York very quickly. What are the characteristics of New York State, New York Colony? Is it part of New England? Is it part of the Puritan tradition? No. New York is going to develop as a place where it has New York City, which is a fantastic harbor, natural harbor, deep harbor, heavily covered, beautifully covered and protected. And that'll grow as a commercial center right from the get-go. And then up further, then you'll have upstate New York, which will be heavily agricultural. So you're going to have a very rural area here doing commercial agriculture. Good commercial, it's good land, beautiful land. And then you'll have New York City, and there's always been a split between the upstate New Yorkers and the city and the New York City people. And then is it dominated by one religion? No. It becomes a diverse place full of Dutch and Belgium and French and English, and it wasn't founded for religious purposes. It becomes successful. Now let's go to Pennsylvania. I won't even, as I say, I won't ask questions about New Jersey, Delaware. Let's go to Pennsylvania. I'm calling it the Quaker state. It's the founding of Pennsylvania is all tied up with religion. In particular, it's tied up with the Protestant religious denomination known as the Society of Friends. So I have to do this very, very quickly. Let it be known that in England, we're talking about Protestantism here. We're not talking. In other words, these Protestants are people who believe in Jesus Christ. They believe that Jesus is the Son of God. So do the Catholics. So they're Christians. However, they've broken away from the Catholic Church, and they have a bunch of grievances against the Catholic Church, and they don't want to be a part of it. They have their own set of religious practices. So the Society of Friends was part of that movement in England. It's specifically an English religious belief. And check it out. It was established in England in 1650 by a man and a woman. What? Now, most Americans don't know anything about this because there are so few Quakers. They come to be called Quakers because their true religion is the Society of Friends. What does that tell you? Everyone is a friend. Everyone. But they're called Quakers because they were so deeply religious and they quiver and quake at the name of the Lord. And so the only thing you may know in connection with them is this guy. And what has he got you look at him, can you tell what has he got in common with a Puritan? Well, he's wearing dark clothing, somber clothing. That means he's deeply religious. He is a Protestant. He does believe he's also a Christian. But other than that, the Quakers had the deepest disagreements with the Puritans, and the Puritans feared them and hated them and would whip them and drive them away because they didn't want them in their territory. Because the Quakers had a set of radical beliefs for their time. As I say, it was founded in 1650 by a man and a woman, a co-equal. Now that alone tells you something. A man and a woman established it at a time when women were almost always subordinate to men. So they did have radical ideas on gender, the sexes, the equality of the sexes, and the equality of the races, and the potential of all people to be saved. So I'll just knock it right out. What did they believe? They had a very kind of optimistic view of man's potential. They didn't believe in predestination. They didn't believe there was an unknowable list of people who are actually going to go to heaven and almost nobody's name is on it. They didn't believe that. They believed everybody could go to heaven. They didn't believe the Bible was the sole source of religious authority. They didn't believe man was, hopelessly sinful as a result of falling out of heaven. They didn't. This is their key to their belief. They believe that inside every single human being there was what they call the inner light. And let's assume that they were talking about like the Holy Spirit or something. Let's assume something like that. They called it the inner light. Everybody has it. Every son and daughter of God has it from their point of view. But you must find it. You must find it within yourself, and you can find it. And so through contemplation and meditation, you've got to find your relationship with God. But you must do it. Nobody can do it for you. Nobody can be your agent or middleman. And everybody can do it. This race, that race, the Native Americans, slaves. There are no slaves to a Quaker. They're all children of God. So men are equal to women in the eyes of God and must be treated so. Everybody's a brother, everybody's a sister. That's why their form of address to everybody was always thee and thou. And that's a very personal and affectionate form of reference, which is offensive to Europeans who believed in a hierarchy. I'm a member of the nobility. You can't talk to me that way. You're not my equal. People are not equal. So these guys got into trouble with everybody. They said that you don't need a preacher. Preacher can't help you. You have to do it. You've got to find your inner light. We don't need preachers, and in fact, basically, there's almost no clergy. There's really no need for ministers in the Society of Friends. Well, that means who'd they make mad? All the ministers. So you got a group of people saying women are equal to men. All races are equal. The rich are no better than the poor. That's making everybody mad. And so they got into all kinds of trouble in England. And they absolutely refuse to use violence and to the point of allowing themselves to be killed. They'll always turn the other cheek. And so they will not pay to support war, and they won't participate in wars. All those things bring them, a target of persecution. So a rich Englishman, William Penn, had joined this faction. He had a bunch of dough. He had a connection with the king, was owed money. He buys big chunks of land in order for there to be a safe haven for the Quakers. And so they set it up. And he has Pennsylvania, which is Penn's Woods, Pennsylvania. And it will necessarily have to be a place that allows true religious freedom, because these are people who say, you know what? You must find your own way. So they're quite a group of people. It's a very small denomination in America today, very, very small. It's still around. Philadelphia becomes the main city, and that is the Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. There just weren't that many Quakers in the world. It's such a dangerous religion, few people believed it. So they never become a majority of that big colony. So it becomes a place full of German-speaking people, English people, French people, with a bunch of different religions. They allowed different religions. They are basically the only colony that had good relations with the Native Americans, because Penn insisted on it, and it becomes a success. Beautiful land in Pennsylvania. It's a beautiful state. Good commercial farming. Good wheat up here. Very nice port in Philadelphia. Done with that. We have just finished all the material from chapter 2, going into the last chapter.